All righty. Sorry, I'm just looking through something right now. All right. Hi, everybody. Sorry, I was getting material and stuff together so we could have a meeting today about data-informed community-focused policing, the architecture of surveillance, and a lot of work that we're doing. My name's Jamie. I'm with the Stop LAPD Spying Coalition. I've been with the coalition for quite some time now, almost 9 years. And I also helped facilitate the fight against predictive policing, Operation LA Strategic Extraction and Restoration, which was a person and a place-based predictive policing program, and we'll be kind of revisiting that today, and also PredPol, and both of those programs were dismantled. PredPol this year and Laser was dismantled last year. So now we're kind of regrouping. I think it's a time for us to kind of go back to the basics, doing a lot of research and kind of figuring out what this new type of data-driven programming LAPD is using now, which they're calling data-informed community-focused policing. We're looking at the architecture of surveillance a little bit more. We're talking about location-based policing. And so not only are we doing that knowledge sharing amongst each other, but we're also building with other groups. And that's really, really important when we start thinking about strategy, especially with how LAPD has kind of reconfigured itself when it's thinking about data-driven policing. It's not easy anymore. We can't just go after a program. So, and I mean, I don't say that easy like it was easy, but man, we took down those two programs real quick. I mean, we really showed how like violent they were. So anyway, so we're going to be going through a couple things today. I'll run through the agenda, then I'm going to have Hamid just kind of let folks know how to engage, how we kind of run the meeting. We're a small group, which is really awesome. Sometimes I prefer that. It allows me to kind of really get conversation going and explain a lot more. So we'll see how that flows. Sometimes people come in late, but we're going to go through a letter that we sent to the commission. The commission, data informed, they have a data-driven policing commission subcommittee. So we sent them a letter. So we're going to go through that letter. We're going to go through the architecture of surveillance public records request that we filed and kind of talk a little bit about that research and that fight that's going on to get more information. We're going to talk about our project around location-based policing and kind of ideas and ways that we're thinking about what does it mean for land to be policed. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the police commission, the board of police commissioners, and some changes that have gone on. So, and then we'll leave some room for announcements. So before that, I'm going to let Hamid kind of explain how we're engaging and different kinds of why you all are muted right now and those things.
Hey everybody, welcome. This is Hamid. So today is our 23rd webinar since we started this in the last week of March. It's been a minute. This is our Power Not Paranoia Zoom webinar series, and we have one every Tuesday. And the way when you all chimed in where you cannot unmute yourself, and it is not that we're trying to police. We're trying to shut that down and dismantle it. But we've had a little share of Zoom bombing, and where, you know, just folks were just taking advantage of the place and really trying to mess with us. Although we didn't let that last too long. So the idea is to keep it muted, and you know, when Jamie opens it up for you know, collective conversation, we'll try to unmute and see where things are. And it's like Jamie said, it's a smaller group, so definitely much more manageable. And then also, so please feel free to, if you have a comment or a question, to put it in the chat room. Now, the chat is also kind of limited. It only goes to the host and the co-host. So you won't be able to send private messages to everybody because we also got Zoom bombed through chat as well. So just trying to you know, keep that very much focused on the conversation. And if people end up getting on the phone, we'll pass out a text number where people can text us as well with their questions and comments. So that's it for me. And also real quickly, this coming Thursday is our fourth Surveillance 101 teach-in as well. We've been doing those starting last month, every second and fourth Thursday of the month. So please join us for that. But if there's no questions about it, Jamie, back to you.
Cool. Thanks, Hamid. So, so I'm excited. So possibly we can do open it up and have kind of a more generative conversation where we're not so limited by the mic and kind of the comment or the chat room. So, so we'll see how that flows. So I wanted to first start off talking a little bit about just the transition, like what this group is right now. And I kind of mentioned a little bit how we're in those like basic phases right now where we're just trying to build, and we're trying to build our own knowledge. We're trying to build with other groups. And so that takes time. And sometimes when you're coming out of a campaign and you're so used to just being focused on something, you have to like reorient yourself into that slowing down again and really focus on building. But it's a great place to be. And so the transition that kind of happened was that, like I said, we were looking at Predpol and laser, and as a response to all our criticism and to our basically calling it out as being fundamentally flawed, that it was violent, that predictive policing was really a veneer of science put to same old policing practices, you know, maybe in a sense of consolidating data, expediting the process, making it more violent, legitimizing the process more. It really was the same thing that had always existed. So, so in that process, LAPD and the Office of Inspector General kind of responded. And the Office of Inspector General, of course, you know, supposed to be the watchdog, but really is the excuse maker for LAPD, and said, you know, basically, if you change it like this and this and this, then, you know, it'll be more constitutional, it'll have more procedural justice, and there won't be all these, you know, it'll be more kind of applied equally and the same throughout all the different divisions and areas of LAPD. LAPD has 21 areas and four bureaus. So so anyway, so that all happened, right? And Moore was at that time chief of police, and in fact, he was in transition from Beck, and waited, you know, like waited for that hearing where we had the first national data-driven policing hearing and wanted to be present. So now he basically, LAPD came up with a new program called Data-Informed Community-Focused Policing. And essentially, you know, it was an interesting move that they made. They basically made it so that they threw everything at us. You know, it wasn't just a program that was a predictive policing program. It wasn't just, you know, something like singular that we could get at. They developed a whole almost comprehensive intersectional violent program that makes it so that you're not only going after algorithms, data analytics centers, you know, pseudo ideologies like collective efficacy and the SARA model. You're going after crime prevention through environmental design. They're creating new engagement areas called neighborhood engagement areas, where senior lead officers go in and they build relationships with businesses, and then they're using broken windows policing, and then they're using offender-based policing. So it's essentially, they said, we're not going to call it, you know, these individual programs. We're just going to kind of give it one name, and we're going to throw everything at it. And we're going to say it's community focused because we do surveys. And so then I realized that, you know, we really needed to come together again and kind of not only build our knowledge around these different components that they were raising, which I think a lot of us do. I mean, some of these programs are really old. When we think about CompStat, when we think that's also a part of it, think about broken windows, crime prevention through environmental design, are very, very old tactics. They're not very new. So we really do have that collective knowledge of understanding those programs, because we have histories that we come from where you know, where there are people that we're partnering with who have been a part of this abolitionist movement for a very long time that understand those components. But then we have new things like community safety operations centers, which is a data analytics center that's like pure bureau, but also the area crime, the ACCICs, which is, I always remember, there's like all these like alphabet soup, area crime something intelligence center. The other C stands for something, and I never remember it, but we'll get back to it. So, and that's another data analytics center, but it's, you know, when we think about data analytics centers that collect data, that, you know, kind of create who the offender they're going to go after, what area they're going to, you know, target, and how they talk about these, almost like a war room, it kind of brings to mind what fusion centers are, right? Fusion centers are kind of a federally funded program that's nationwide, and there's more than 85. Sorry, I have a fire truck. I don't know if you guys can hear that. But there's more than 85 nationwide, but they do the same thing. They have task force, the Joint Terrorism Task Force is inside. They collect a lot of, you know, surveillance data, and then they, you know, have their own folks that they'll send out. Occupy LA was very known for being infiltrated by people that were coming out of fusion centers, or different officers that were coming out of fusion centers that were collecting data on different folks who were organizing in that movement. And so the CSOCs and the ACCICs are new, and they're similar to that, right? So, so anyways, I'm gonna start to share the screen right now and kind of, you know, bring people into where our group is at right now. And before I do that, I'm just gonna say one more thing. This group, if anything you are interested in what's going on here and you wanna help in any kind of way, this is kind of where I show you everything that we're doing. And this particular group, so it's almost like our share out meeting where we're like, everyone's been working on this stuff and now we're going to share everything we're doing. But if you really wanted to get into the fine details, this group meets on a working group the first Monday and the third Monday of the month. So if there's something that you like, are like, yeah, I can contribute, you know what, or I'm interested and, you know, I want to be a part of this, drop your email in the chat, and or let me know what part of it is, your phone number. If you're not available during that time, I'm always open to meeting one-on-one and kind of looping you in however that works for you. But so just wanted to preface it with that, and I'm just going to share out a lot of what we've been doing. So this first piece that I wanted to share out is, and folks can see my screen, hopefully. It's kind of a big screen right now, but oh well. Okay, so I wanted to share out a letter that we wrote to the commission. And like I mentioned before, the commission has different subcommittees, and this is the Board of Police Commissioners. And the Board of Police Commissioners, they're appointed by the mayor, and in fact, they're appointing a new police commissioner, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. They oversee, they're like the 5 stars, they're the ones that are in charge, right? Which we know is not the case. We know they're a rubber stamp body, and we know that they tend to, you know, just let LAPD do whatever they want. It's like a puppet show, and it's been that way. I've been going for many, many years, and you know, I've never seen I've seen someone vote no once, abstain once, and that's about it. So it's one of those defeating places that a lot of times people ask, like, why do you all go? But it really is a place where when we were meeting in person, like, we own that space. They just were so uncomfortable with us being there. And this is part of the new strategy that COVID basically has like dropped on us. Like, how do we show our power to a place where we almost can't be? But we also learn a lot, because that's where monies and programs are going through. And so it's almost necessary if we're trying to keep up with what LAPD is doing, and not just, you know, receiving the boot, but, you know, getting ahead of it and seeing what's going on. It's you know, it's an important space to be in. It's every Tuesday morning at 9:30. There's a crew of us that you know, go there and, you know, talk back to them, talk truth to power. So anyways, getting back to this letter. So this letter we wrote, and you'll see down here that we wrote it to the Data-Driven Policing Committee Commissioners, which is comprised of Dale Bonner, Shane Goldsmith, and I believe Eileen Decker. Is that correct, Hamid? Those 3? Yeah. And so those 3 commissioners basically are supposed to be in charge of data-informed, of any kind of data-driven program, and are supposed to be abreast to what's going on. So we addressed the letter to them because we did not have any interest in engaging Michael Moore, the chief of police, because of course he's going to say everything's great, we love it, the program's amazing, and, you know, we're going to be there's going to be tons of procedural justice. We're going to, you know, mind everybody's constitutional rights, even though with the last program with laser, they completely were arbitrarily putting people on lists to track and stalk through the habitual offender or through the chronic offender program. So there was, and, you know, and there's so many scandals that have already happened under his watch with gang databases where people were being arbitrarily put into gang databases as well. So, you know, it's kind of one of those things where it's like, there's no point in talking to him because he's, you know, he's the leader of the lies and the violence. So we started off this letter, right? And I'm just going to take you real quickly through it, and then we'll kind of go through it specifically, because at the end of this, my question's going to be to folks is like, what's our next step, right? Because overall, we sent this letter and the commission had Moore respond to us. And so Moore ends up responding in a letter to us, and this is the letter where he responds to us. And he basically says, and we'll go through it, that everything's peachy keen. This is a great program. You got it all wrong. You don't know what you're talking about, and this is going to be the best things, you know, ever. So, so to be expected, of course, you know, you're not going to have a chief of police say, "Oh, you're completely right," and, you know, I'm just going to, you know, dismantle it tomorrow, and thank you for all your information. So that definitely wasn't going to happen. But like I said, we had no intention of talking to him because that's exactly what a chief of police is going to do. So we went over several sections. We kind of started with the basis of speculative policing, which is what, you know, when you go to the Surveillance 101 teach-ins, a lot of times Hamid will take you through, the coalition will take you through what intelligence-led policing is, which really started to cement speculative and hunch-based policing, which is the essence of data-driven policing, where they collect enough data on you and they can decide what you're going to possibly do because they have collected all this data on you, right? So we are kind of taking the commission on a journey, like, let's get to the very basis of this. You know, do you even understand suspicious activity reporting in the Office of Director of National Intelligence and how he defines suspicion, which really, you know, the definition of suspicion is observed behavior reasonably indicative of pre-operational planning. So I'm watching you, I have a concern that you're gonna possibly think about doing something. That is predictive policing, that is data-driven policing, that is racist policing, it's existed forever. So it felt really important for us to kind of take them back and say, like, look, this whole data-informed community-focused policing is based on something, is based on the pseudo-ideologies of intelligence-led policing. And a lot of times I say pseudo-ideology because it's not based in reality. Like, you can't predict what people are going to do based on data sets. You speak to any, you know, data scientist and they're going to say, well, you know, like, you know, it's not really possible. You can make estimations and you can get 80-90%, but you're not going to be completely accurate. And 90% accuracy in policing means 10% of people die. And, you know, and that's what we're talking about. That's why we're in the streets. So because it doesn't matter, 1%, you know, 0.5%, nobody should be dying because of someone's assumption and someone's criminal, someone placing criminality on a person. Like, that is the antithesis of what life-affirming resources we need in the community are. So then we kind of talked about the architecture of surveillance and the different types of equipment that are now being used. We got into discussing a little bit about offender-based policing, which is kind of this kind of new tactic. And I don't know if I can say, because, you know, none of this stuff is really new, but it's one they're trying to solidify and they're trying to cement. And they're basically saying, you know, the Bureau of Justice Assistance says if you track and trace someone who's on parole or probation or has orders for community supervision after release, that this will reduce recidivism. Which, if you speak to a lot of people who are on parole, probation, or under any kind of community supervision, It's constantly having the police on your back. Anytime you are engaged with the police means that you're going to be impacted by some kind of violence. And the goal that we're looking towards when we think about abolition is trying to reduce the contact of our community, especially our most vulnerable communities, those coming out of cages, those who are young, from engaging with police, because every time they engage with police, something violent ends up happening, whether they get arrested, whether they're harmed, or whether they're murdered. So we, kind of went into that. And of course, Moore's response was, hey, we got all this research, monitoring people, and it's not tracking them, and it's not targeting them. And so he defends that. And then here we go into location-based policing. And I want to later on kind of open up this conversation, because we're working a lot around thinking about land and the removal of people of land, off of land, whether through evictions, whether through nuisance abatement, or making locations like unbearable to live in because of police harassment. A form of violence that doesn't necessarily come in the shape of a baton or a bullet, but removes you from land. It is the legacy of settler colonialism, and then how that correlates to different types of gentrification, real estate speculation, and how our land ends up becoming changed and altered in order to make it easier to police people, kettle people, monitor people, watch people. So here we kind of talk a little bit more about, the failure of predictive policing, the failure of predpol particularly, and how it's technically, how it creates these feedback loops. It's still very subjective. As we saw in predpol, some of the things that the coalition ended up seeing with predpol is that it was actually being used to quarantine Skid Row. And I'll show some maps in a little bit, which demonstrates how predpol was actually being used and didn't necessarily have that feedback loop of over policing the same community. But, the veneer of science, again, was just basically, it was being used however LAPD wanted to use it. Because you can alter the maps. You don't have to do exactly what the computer says. Crime analysts can alter it. So we spoke a little bit about data analytics centers, and I've been saying the two community safety operations centers. I don't know if you can see my cursor, but it's down here. Community safety operations centers and the area crime and that's the word. That's why I never remember that word. They put the word community intelligence center, and I just can't seem to say area crime and community intelligence center, because it's like, what the heck is community in any of that? And it just sounds like it's just so wrong. Anyway, so these intelligence centers, and the way it's so interesting, the way that Moore comes back at us in this component of the letter is he says these intelligence centers were established to build trust with the community. So these intelligence centers are our centers that we engage with law enforcement in order to feel like we trust them, and that we build with them to better police our neighborhoods. And what's interesting is that one thing that he doesn't address in the letter, and he kind of floats over it, is that from when they had initially launched the community safety operations centers, which are the data analytics centers per bureau, they in the very first launch from March to October of 2016, and my cursor's right here again, I know it's kind of light, and I'm not able to highlight right now, I don't know why, but LAPD had killed 19 people, right, during that time period only, and during that year, and 13 of them were killed between March and October of 2016 in the launch of CSOC, and they were all related to the CSOC and its relationship to laser or gang suppression. So remember how I was talking about when we paralleled it to fusion centers, and how fusion centers had the Joint Terrorism Task Force, but also had their own law enforcement agencies that would go out and spy, and particularly in Occupy, the Occupy movement that was happening. The CSOCs predominantly work with Metro and gang suppression the gang enforcement detail. But what we're also finding through other emails that we're going through in a public records request that we did particularly on the laser program, is that we're even seeing the FBI pop up. So I don't know how community oriented they think this is, but really what they're mimicking is that multi-agency task force that we're seeing, and maybe later on Hamid can speak about this a little bit, but that we're seeing nationwide, where you see these multiple agencies coming into a city or to an area and working together to police, to gather data, to basically do these kinds of violent suppression interventions. One thing that I was going to say is that we were actually last year, was it last year? The end of 2018, we actually shut down a CSOC. For the day, we had a direct action. We brought out the commander. We lit a fire in front of the police station. We broke bread. We sang, we danced, we drummed, and even the fire trucks showed up, and they ended up leaving because they said our fire was controlled. And so all of Central Division, where the CSOC was like located in, because it's just like a war room basically. They shut down the whole station while we were out there. But so again, more just comes back that, how dare we say these centers are violent, they're for the community. So and then we move into something called collective efficacy. And we're almost done, so hang on with me. Like I said, data-informed community-focused policing is really their tactic to wear you out, so that there's so many different angles they're trying to throw at you that kind of like the algorithm and kind of like, risk assessments that were all very new to us, a few years ago, that kind of, gave that hesitancy, like, can I understand this? I really feel like they're doing this with data-informed community-focused policing, where they're trying to throw all these different types of tactics at you to exhaust, right? And it is to have a conversation about, the importance of understanding these and what the strategy is once we start to kind of really develop that collective knowledge around what they're saying. Because, for example, collective efficacy, one thing that Moore also sidelines in this particular point that we bring up is that this is how they claim collective efficacy is how law enforcement measures a person's commitment and cohesiveness and engagement in their community. And so we bring up this report that Justice, Security, and Strategies, which is a consulting agent that works with LAPD, we brought up a report that a study they did in Miami-Dade, where they basically said, okay, what is the makeup? Who do these people look like that have more collective efficacy or social cohesion, or are more like affiliated to their communities? And they basically said older residents who own homes who are male, so younger residents, women, people on income assistance, and who were renters had less efficacy. So when you think about who the community is that LAPD is building with, like, we've always known it's with, your rich, normally white, men, suburban, we saw that with the Republican National Convention, that they actually had the couple that pointed the guns at the protesters in the Republican National Convention. I don't know if folks even took a peek at that circus that went on last night, but though that's the community that will call the police, the community that will engage with the police, the community that doesn't feel the boot end of police. And I think that, what was interesting about his response is that he doesn't even address the report. He just kind of says, oh, that's not what we do. This is about, everything coming from the community. This is about us, getting to know the community. And here you'll see the neighborhood engagement areas where he goes on about how our senior lead officers, they go in and they connect with the business owners and they find out what their needs are. And today even more was speaking about that. And again, you see this like property owners are who they're engaging with, people. And not to say that everybody who owns property is problematic, but it's who they're valuing over other folks, right? And so he totally sidelines that, which I find, really interesting, because it's like he's picking and choosing who he wants to talk, what he wants to talk about. And so the last and final thing, and trust me, we didn't touch on everything in data-informed community-focused policing, because I think the letter would have been another 3 pages long. We left some stuff out. But the last thing we wanted to bring up was community surveys. And what was so interesting in the actual handbook that they presented, that we were responding to, is that they speak about Elucid, right? And so Elucid is a basically kind of digital way that they can run surveys. And what happens, it's this small, startup company from some young folks, where basically through those games that people play, Candy Crush and Farmland or things like that, they basically can ping your location and send you a survey. And the minute you open it up, it pings back to them where you're at. And they'll ping you several times to make sure that you kind of stay in that general area, that they can prove that you're from where you say you're from. And what they end up doing is, you fill out this survey, and they do a type of sentiment mapping, where they, figure out, how do you feel about police? And so when we think about not only, these algorithms like Predpol or any type of hotspot mapping, when we think about laser zones or, habitual offenders, where they're mapping not only where do people live, where do particular people live, where do I predict crime's going to be, they're also predicting now, well, what does this area feel about police? And that really, in the end, is kind of a counterinsurgency tactic, where when people don't like police, they have a tendency to put more police there, under the guise that by putting police there, you are building relationship, where it's kind of like, if people don't like police, why are you engaging them more? And it's in very simple way of looking at it, it's a way to quell the community, right? To put more forces there to make sure the community is not rebelling in some kind of way. And then lastly, and so anyways, they did one Elucid survey, and then so in their handbook that we were responding to, they basically said, oh, and we're doing awesome, because the last Elucid survey, we were great and everybody just loved us. And this was one survey. And we reminded them that since 2010, 0 bias policing complaints that were filed had been sustained. Since 2010. So we're talking about thousands of bias policing complaints had ever been sustained, and ever been, where they even believed the person who was making the complaint. And then in 2016, Black folks were basically saying that, their experiences with law enforcement were bad, that they, didn't have this, generative experience with police. And Moore seems to, again, just sideline all of this. So, so anyways, this is his response. And I know today, Hamid, I don't know if you want to speak about it a little bit, because I wasn't able to make it to the police commission, but Moore responds to us, and we always make Hamid take the fall every time we write a letter to the commission. We always have Hamid sign it. But it, a lot of everything in the coalition is very jointly collaborative. So, so anyways, this is Moore's response, and he goes, he basically, tells us what he thinks about our response, and basically says that we are misguided and that we don't know what we're talking about. He's going to clarify it, and in that. and that basically, you know, this was it, that we think it's great and we're moving forward and we believe that it's going to build trust, and signed, you know, Michael Moore. So, Mohammed, did you want to talk a little bit about your comment to the police commission? And I'll stop sharing. And today, just to kind of talk a little bit about the points that you raised with them.
Sure, but there's a comment here about the letter itself, about when you talked about location-based policing, and a comment from Jojo about rest in peace, Breonna Taylor, and everybody murdered in the process of gentrification. So location-based policing, I don't know if you want to talk about that a little bit more, about, you know, what was going on in Kentucky around this, the place where
Oh,
Breonna
yeah.
Taylor was murdered.
Yeah, so, and we're gonna definitely get into that and show some maps here in a little bit. And it's definitely a conversation, a larger conversation that I want to have.
Okay.
But so just briefly, Breonna Taylor, and forgive me, I don't remember the lawyer's name, but basically what happened is that her house had been in the middle of an area where they wanted to build, like, kind of recreate this area and build this new kind of, I don't even think it was housing, I think it was like some kind of center they wanted to build. And so that house was kind of like in the middle of those plans, in the middle of that area that they wanted to redevelop or gentrify. And her house had been under surveillance for a long time. And so what the lawyer, and this is what's really amazing, because this is the other work around location-based policing that we're going to talk about in a little bit, is that the lawyer, and this is the kind of lawyering we need. We need lawyers to be able to kind of put things on the line and make the case for the community, where he makes the case that Breonna Taylor's home and the police were working in conjunction with the city to somehow criminalize the location to get her removed. And so whether it was through the criminalization, that there was some kind of drug, you know, issues going on in the space, where they do the no-knock warrants, or they bust into the home, in which they ended up murdering her, or they find a way to evict you. There was a correlation the lawyer was making to the development process. Now, not to open up this conversation completely, because I want to walk people through some of what is called Operation Laser and some of the back work that we're doing. But Operation Laser worked exactly like that, where this program worked with the citywide nuisance abatement program, and also implemented evictions within laser zones. So Laser created something called laser zones that were based on gun violence. And within the laser zones, they pinpointed anchor points where there were like calls for service, or some kind of, basically LAPD created the data that needed to criminalize the location, where the city could come in and say, okay, this area is a nuisance, this person needs to be evicted, and they could take the property. So we have proof that they were working with them, and now we're going through emails where we're actually reading about them working with the crime. There's a forensics lab at Cal State LA where we're reading through emails of a crime intelligence analyst who is giving a testimony to an eviction case, along with an informant that they had sent in to basically, you know, monitor and build the case against a particular location, which unfortunately they've redacted the location. So I have no idea what location it is, but the infrastructure of seeing who they were working with, and that's where the FBI gang task force comes in, where again, we're seeing these multi-agency task force, and we're going to be able to map out, hopefully, who is working with the city to essentially take properties. So what they were speaking about with Breonna Taylor is definitely very legitimate, and definitely how laser was working, and probably is continuing to work, because if you remember, part of what I was talking about in the letter is I spoke about the neighborhood engagement areas, right, where they're engaging business owners, and they're like kind of walking through areas and seeing what's going on. You know, is there loitering, is something happening? Because anchor points, which were part of the laser program, that's why there's so much to walk through sometimes, were not necessarily dismantled, but they said they wanted to change the name because they didn't want the community to feel like the area was an anchor. So they said, if I change the name, then it's something better, right? So now we have this thing called neighborhood engagement areas in the data-informed community focused policing. So to Jojo's point, and that was Jojo, correct? Definitely very much so that reality and that statement that the lawyer was making is very much seen in LA.
Do you want me to see if it's a smaller group, if we can unmute them for comments, or if folks have any questions or
Yeah,
anything?
I wanted to see if it's possible, just real quick before we open it up, to bring people back to the letter, because I know we kind of talked a little bit about location-based policing, because I wanted to get us to a point of figuring out what we want to do next as well. So definitely want to open it up for any kind of questions around the data-informed community-focused policing, letter programming and all that, so wherever that takes us, but also to kind of conclude with, do we want to respond? And Hamid, I wanted you to kind of talk a little bit about what you said at the police commission, and do you mind just kind of letting folks know how you responded real quick, and then we can open it up?
Yeah, no, I just kept it very brief because of this whole public comment, the fiasco that's going on, and just highlighted the issue that we had written a letter specifically to the data informed policing subcommittee, but it was Moore who responded on behalf of, and we don't even know if this was on behalf of, because the letter doesn't even mention that. I think the question really is that how, given again these unique circumstances with COVID, and we just like in a virtual meeting, how do we then hit back the subcommittee that there is? Because obviously a lot of these other things continue to move. One of the things that at least which is moving really fast, which is an integral part of data informed community focused policing, is the Community Safety Partnership Program and CSP, in which they are expanding that CSP. And then, of course, today, one of the commissioners that they confirmed, who's replacing an earlier previous commissioner too, is very much rooted into, like, just around youth empowerment and all of that. But ultimately, the goal that they're trying to get to is, and the argument that they're using, that the youth are really don't trust the LAPD. We want to build that relationship, on and on and on. So it's a very insidious way of moving into the community. So the answer to your question, as far as the commission is concerned, there was no response from them.
So maybe we can unmute and just kind of have a conversation about what should our next step be with this letter. Should we just kind of let it be? Should we respond? Should we respond differently? Because there are some, street actions that are happening. We're going to talk about some actions that we're having with the mayor right now, where we had an action at the mayor's house. But, what should we do? And do folks have any kind of ideas or suggestions in regards to that?
So I've unmuted and also provided access folks to mute and unmute themselves too.
Or do folks have any questions or just want to talk about that program as well?
I'm wondering, historically, like the use of letters, I guess, in your past campaigns that you've done, and if you felt like kind of engaging through that has been a pretty good tactic. I mean, it seems like a good way to get also more information and be able to, call them out on certain things, and also can publicize. But I'm just wondering in past
Well, one thing that, you know, I was just thinking about it right now that's been interesting is that they're in this whole like, we want to talk to the public, the city council's like, we need to talk to the public, we need to generate, information. And we got them on this because they tried to ignore us. And so then we just called them out and we're like, you're trying to get community input and we wrote you a 3-page letter and you completely ignored us. And so then all of a sudden they're like, oh shit. And then they responded. It documents a history as well, especially when you end up having to use alternative methods to be seen and heard. You have like, a documented history with people. But yeah, to your point, the coalition's always written tons of letters. We're like letter writers. Yes, we've definitely used that tactic. Yeah.
I think to your point, Ian, it is one of the tools, obviously, because ultimately it goes back to organizing and building power on the ground. But I think what it does is it helps us further crystallize in our own understanding of creating almost like an organizing tool out of that. Because one of the things that we could do with the letter that we wrote is to kind of turn that into either a zine or a meme or just however we want to just build that. And right now, actually, there is an artist who has the letter and who's been looking at it and creating some memes for popular education. So it serves very. I mean, I always look at these things as an organizing tool because we know that I mean. No, we're not even writing the letter with the trust that what Jamie was saying earlier, that they're going to say, oh, yeah, you're right. Because I think, but it's in a sense that we are creating this whole journey towards and in which documenting it and checking that box is one thing that, look, we told you so. But in a sense, we feel that it definitely has a whole lot of agitational value as well. That how do we then bring it to the community? Because people always say, well, have you met with the council members? Have you met with the police chiefs? Well, we don't have time because we don't want a seat at the table. We want to blow off that table. We want to overturn that table. So it's nothing is going to change by having a seat at the table. So I think that's what really we're trying to kind of build over here is a model, which then, of course, further to see how they respond. So there are some vignettes in there that will help us further crystallize it and then file for public records and things like that too.
Who's the artist, homie?
This is that person, Chris.
Chris?
Yeah.
Let me know if they want to meet with us to talk more about the letter.
They're in Tokyo.
Well, I mean, we're not.
Yeah,
like,
no, I'm just
we're not going anywhere anyways. So,
sure.
I can't even go down the street, let alone Tokyo.
I know. No, these are the folks who had volunteered a couple months ago, so they've had this thing with them, but they're slowly kind of getting to it.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
That's
so
great.
another comment here from Andrew that Andrew, do you want to just unmute and just to make a comment?
Yeah, so it sounds to me like their interest in community engagement is stemming from their own recognition that there's a crisis of legitimacy. People don't believe the police, people don't have faith in the police. There are whole communities who'd rather the police just completely not be there at all. And so I feel like the organizing tactic right now is how can we further that crisis to make them even more illegitimate? And how do we spot the ways in which we accidentally give them legitimacy by, making them a more important voice than they are, or giving credence to certain code words or buzzwords or plans that they have? The sort of like general community organizing tactic is to really figure out where to place them and to do some agenda setting. So sort of we're at the charge of what words are being used and what the conversation is and all that kind of stuff.
Definitely.
Yeah, what's interesting about that is that when we named it the architecture of surveillance in the letter, more would refuse to use that term back. Like he was mirroring our letter completely, but refused to use the architecture of surveillance, which I found really interesting. But language is definitely very important, and how we are describing what is going on.
Question.
Sure.
Is there for like the sentiment analysis stuff with Elucid, for example, like they've kind of claimed that the people who are actually filling out the surveys have to be anonymous, so they're not releasing that. But there is, like, in order for the surveys to be administered, it's like they're purchasing ad space essentially from like Candy Crush or whatever. Do we have a list of the companies that they're working through?
Not yet. Not yet. This was actually research that one of our coalition members did that found out about Elucid and where Elucid started, and kind of they gave their examples of how they operate. So actually working towards unpacking more about the various new things that they're doing with data-informed community-focused policing, we have yet to do. And to that point, you know, this is kind of like where we figure out where we're at. Like, do we want to spend some more time digging at, you know, something new that's like Elucid to figure out how it's working? What kind of mapping is it generating? What other systems is it communicating with? How are they using that data? What reports are they generating? Yeah, so we haven't quite done that yet. And there has been talk, and Hamid kind of raised it, where we're like, is it time for us to file another public records request? Like, when do we start kind of getting into that realm of, you know, continuing this deep dive into the new stuff that they're doing, and even the old stuff too, you know, how it's all intersecting.
Oh, and I guess kind of related, but more on the, I guess, is the collective efficacy prong of their program. So like I forget the name of it was like something security strategies, this firm that did the research that you were referring to.
Mm-hmm.
So in their report, do they actually have a list of the businesses also? Like, do we know those? Like, I'm wondering, like, what's going on with, like, if there are any campaigns going on with community organizations around those businesses or things like that.
So are you seeing the businesses that they're speaking to, like through the anchor points or the NEAs, like who the senior lead officers are speaking to? Is that what you're?
Yeah, well, they said that the report that you're referring to is saying that the partnerships that were being established through this community efficacy thing, they're mostly businesses.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, do we know which ones?
Not yet. No, not completely. Not completely yet. In fact, when we were trying to figure out, like with the anchor points, it runs similar, right? And we had asked for, like, what are you doing within these anchor points? And a lot of the data sheets that they were giving us about what was actually happening and what the senior lead officer was doing, who they were talking to, were blank, which was interesting because that was the biggest thing about Laser, is that there was no record keeping of what they were doing. So they couldn't even produce all the chronic offender bulletins. They were having a hard time producing what was actually happening in the spaces. That's where they were, you know, arbitrarily putting people into databases, not even using the risk assessment. So I anticipate that their record keeping of that may end up becoming better because they realize we're kind of onto it, but we don't have that information. Though part of another segment I want to move into around location-based policing is we're trying to establish those relationships. And part of the emails that we're getting from another public records request that we had filed around anchor points are exactly that, like how they're communicating to different city agencies about a particular location that they're trying to take down. That's one thing that we're doing. Not so much the partnerships of who they're building with and who they're talking to, but mostly like the areas that they're trying to take down. But that's a really interesting kind of way to go about it, to actually see who it is that they're speaking to more. And I'm taking notes as we're talking too.
Yeah, I was just going to build on Brian's comment. Thank you, Brian. I think that's definitely an interesting angle because my understanding is that although that study was in Miami-Dade, that they did for that assessment, or was that sentiment meter? No, maybe I'm mixing them too.
No, collective efficacy. They did that study in Miami-Dade where
Miami-Dade, right.
they
But
determined who had, who
gotcha,
was.
gotcha. But on the flip side, when we've been getting information locally here about laser zones and anchor points, we have been able to identify businesses and locations as well. For example, Crenshaw Mall itself is a laser zone, right? So, and I know Jamie's going to talk more about it. And then they also, like Cal State Northridge, a part of Cal State Northridge. I mean, there are even locations as significant like that, which are also basically crime triggers, is what one would call. So yeah. Audrey, you got a question? You're muted. You need to unmute. Yeah.
Are there ways through public records requests or whatever that you can trace? Like, I was curious about Ramona Gardens. Would we be able to like get lists of all the people that have been evicted because of nuisance abatement, you know, that we could tie to the CSP? I'm just curious because the new commissioner grew up in Ramona Gardens, so I was thinking if we could show how in that neighborhood CSP has actually caused harm. So I just wondered, is that something you can get through public records requests, or do you even have to do that?
I think that part of what we're trying to figure out is that kind of network that they use to criminalize the space, because it's like LAPD is being used to create the data that the city needs to remove a space. So CSP would be a part of generating that data. So because CSP is not only just, you know, the engagement with the youth, but it's also meeting with communities about problem areas or problems that they're having. And so those officers, in a sense, would generate FI cards, they would respond to calls for services, and those particular data points, the FI cards, the calls for service, would be what criminalizes the spot, which then would allow the multi-agencies to come in, like building and safety, nuisance abatements, evictions, to come in and actually then have that data for their case to remove a family. So it wouldn't be necessarily that there would be a direct connection to CSP, but I think what we're trying to work on is figuring out that web, you know, figuring out all that multi-agency task force that's coming around an area and who are the players that they're using, which I would not doubt that CSP is helping them gather that data, you know, helping them gather that information and kind of a part of that infrastructure that's criminalizing a location or a person that's inside a location, which then deems the area a nuisance, because it's, you know, it's interesting how land gets criminalized, you know, it's either, and it all has to do with people, you know, whoever's occupying that space, that ends up bringing the criminal element to it, which is, you know, if you call because, you know, there's noise, or you call the police yourself because of some kind of, you know, interpersonal crisis that's going on, interpersonal, or if, you know, you get carded, you know, in front of your house, and that all generates data that the city can use to, and bring in the neighborhood prosecutor to build a case against, you know, removing you.
It'll be interesting to see, though, Jamie, that on Audrey's point, and of course, Union de Vecino has been doing a lot of organizing out in Boyle Heights and Maywood and all, and towards where Ramona Gardens is, that would, and this is a point of clarification, that CNAP, the Citywide Nuisance Abatement Program, is that deployed on housing projects? Or is that is deployed on housing projects? So now, because the property would not be deemed as a nuisance since it's a city's right? So anyways,
evictions.
That just needs, I mean, I want to do some more research on my own, so yes, but go ahead, but it would lead to eviction then.
Yeah, well, but you have to think about it this way. Then this is the way I'm thinking about it based on the things that I'm seeing and the things that I'm reading, is that the data has to be generated so the neighborhood prosecutor can come in. We're not going to get a document that says the community safety partnership evicted that person. Like, we're not going to find that, but we're going to find, you know, maybe they were an informant, you know, maybe they were someone that built a relationship that was able to create an informant that was able to, you know, say that this person in Ramona Gardens was a gang member, was causing problems, and they get that informant to basically, you know,
Gotcha.
testify in an eviction case against that family to get them out, right? So we have to think about it in the sense of what is criminalizing that space and who are they using to help build that case. And so informants, calls for service, field interview cards. So whoever can generate that. And I think what would be interesting is to actually pool, because right now I've seen houses, but I have not directly seen the public housing of someone like evicted. I haven't seen that yet. But with HACLA,
The housing authority.
yeah, the housing authority had to buy its own CCTVs, its closed circuit television cameras, that LAPD had full access to. And these also had automatic license plate readers, and they put them all through the public housing areas. So to be able to better police, and we know that there's that connection that once you're arrested and you live in a certain house, you're gonna get evicted. So that's the data they need to remove people from it. So very much. So now, is it directly correlated to laser, to the NEAs? It doesn't. I don't even know if it really matters. It's the tactic that they're using to bring in, you know, to generate the data and then to remove people. I think the biggest thing is realizing that is really being able to put a name to the fact that that's the role they play. They generate the data. So anytime you have them closer to you, they're going to generate some type of data to about you.
Go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, going off what you just said, I'm wondering, like, could since HACLA is like a public agency, could we request, like, do they record the reason for it has to be like a file that has the reason for the evictions?
Yeah, I know that anti-eviction mapping project, I think it was, we were not that group particularly. We were working with another group, and we were looking at CNAP cases that they filed, and they're hard to get because I believe there's privacy acts around it where they can't, it's like a little home and then it's someone gets named in it. So but they were able to secure more. And so that's something that with like housing orgs, that we definitely, on that flip end of that housing work, that we want to see, because what we were trying to find out were any chronic offenders named in the CNAP cases. And then we were also trying to find out, was laser named? Was anything about these predictive policing programs named? And that's why I think it's not so much the programs that they name in the case, it's the data, you know? The data is what gives the neighborhood prosecutor, what gives the city attorney the ability to move in. And so it's how that and I don't know, I mean, honestly, I don't know, it's those emails. So if anybody wants to go through like thousands of emails with me, that's what I'm trying to figure out right now, is to figure out who are all these different agencies that I'm seeing them. Because basically this one case that I'm looking at, and I think they didn't redact it at the very end. It's like the Peppermill Hotel or something like that in Hollywood. But they're going from talking to someone in Cal State LA that's a crime intelligence that works in the forensic lab that's in Cal State LA. They have a whole building. Then they're speaking about an informant. Then you see emails from the FBI gang task force. Then you see emails from like just the gang enforcement detail. So what I'm going to try to do is I want to start creating a web of who all these people are that they're either in communication with or who are actually giving testimony to the eviction case, because then that'll give us a better idea of like who's coming in. They're not being specific by, you know, they're redacting the entire location. They're not being there's very little, but sometimes they slip up. Like I got the name of a location because they forgot to redact it. And that's kind of, so if anybody is, you know, interested in kind of looking at that and going through those emails, it's definitely an outstanding thing. And we can ask for more, because part of it is that they generated so many emails for us that we gave them a list of words. So I'm also trying to make sure that the words pop up in the emails, and I can say, like, you know, you need to respond and say, was this word never mentioned in any of the thousands of emails you went through, type thing. So so that's something that exactly what we're trying to do, is to find out who the players are in building the case against spaces.
Yeah, I would be willing to help. Like, I don't know if I could go through 1,000 emails.
Well, sometimes they like, it's just like repetitive, you know, like you get the flow where it's just like, oh damn, I read this email already, but it's just like kind of, I don't know, it, you know, you don't have to go through all 1,000 in one night, you know, take 1,000 over a month. Yeah, can you drop your, yeah, they are searchable too. Can you drop your email in the chat, and I can definitely check in with you and we can share that. So anyway, so bringing us back a little bit, because what I can do is I can move us into the location-based stuff that we're doing, since we're kind of in that part of the conversation anyways. But any suggestions? Should we, you know, push back on the commissioners just to be annoying and, you know, send them a letter and respond a little bit to what more is sidelining? And just say, hey, we want a response from you. Like, what the hell? You know, what is this? I don't know.
Absolutely. We've already thrown that first stone at them today, so definitely.
Yeah. I just like to be like annoying sometimes, and letters are like strongly worded letters.
Yeah.
Like you said, it's a harder time to also annoy by bringing a ton of people to them. So I feel like a letter is at least a way to like force them to have to engage in that way.
And just so folks know, at the end of this conversation too, we are also not just sending letters. We'll talk a little bit more about what we're doing too. So I want everybody to think I'm weak sauce. So, okay, there's just a couple of emails I'm gonna write down real quick. And then I was gonna, because I think after this thing ends, or the meeting ends, it ends up turning everything off. I can't save everything. Okay. And then, Vivian, I saw you, Vivian. Thank you.
That's Vivan.
Oh, Vivan? Oh, I'm sorry, Vivan. I read that wrong. Vivan from the East
Vivan.
Coast?
Our Vivan.
Vivan, what's up?
East Coast of the world.
Okay, cool. Right on. Okay, so on that note, I'm just gonna, if it's okay with folks, if there's any last comments, I wanted to move us into a little bit of what we're doing around location-based policing, because I got some maps to show. So, okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and switch us. I'm just gonna screen share real quick. Okay, let's go here. Here. Okay, so, okay. So we were talking about the laser program, and part of the thing that with this laser program that they, once we like kind of expose that they're arbitrarily doing this, they're doing whatever they want per every division, they're, you know, it's just one big cluster. You know, we realized, or they decided to not go back to see what harm was done. And we really wanted to be able to figure out, like exactly to Audrey's point, were people evicted? Were people harmed? What was going on? So we started to map different anchor points through a public records request that we're still getting a lot of information from. We were receiving laser zones for every division. We were receiving anchor points. We were receiving like what they're doing in the spaces. And like I said, they were blank. but there's still like a lot of data we're going through. And this is like thousands of documents, but we've been able to narrow down a way to be kind of generative about it. We decided to pick 77th Division, and that was kind of arbitrary because someone ended up organizing all of 77th's hotspots for us, or laser zones and anchor points for us. And then we decided to look at Central Division as well, predominantly because we had predpol hotspot maps also for Central Division. So I'm just going to walk us through these maps and then kind of introduce what we're doing, and I would love to get feedback from folks, since we're already kind of talking about you know, understanding who is going after businesses, you know, how are they targeting businesses, in some senses who are they building with around these businesses, that, you know. So what we're looking at are anchor points in 77th Division. And so these are all different types of anchor points, because an anchor point could be an intersection, a business, an intersection, and a business. So you'll see that here, up here in this left-hand corner, the northwest corner, is 2 businesses and an intersection. Up here, you see it just as an intersection. And when we think about the intersections, it's not unharmful, because part of what they say they're doing is they want to intervene by making the space easier to police, right? And here you have like kind of all 3. You have a business, an intersection, and a business intersection. So let me go to the next slide. Let me see if it'll let me go to the next slide. Okay, and hopefully, okay. So this area right here, and I'm sure folks are familiar with Marathon closing, Nipsey Hussle store was actually part of, and I'm sure people are aware that the CNAP program was being used to try to take down his business and to evict him from that property. But he was also an anchor point with the LAPD. Now, you know, one thing I need to do, and I haven't done yet, is to figure out what year they anchor pointed his spot, because I believe 77th, by 2016, the laser program is already running in South Bureau. And so it leads me to believe by 2016, they were already targeting this area. So, so that was a space that we were able to already know was being targeted, and was in conjunction, the CNAP program was also being used. Now here are the anchor points for Central Division. Now, what's interesting about these is that if you look, these are pretty much, let me see, where is Los Angeles? There's Main Street, San Pedro, San Julian, and I believe somewhere right here is Los Angeles Street. But most of these anchor points right here are all in downtown.
This is right here is central, where I'm kind of moving this thing. That's,
Yeah.
I mean, Los Angeles, and that's Main Street.
Yeah, I can't see it because we can't see your cursor.
Oh, I see.
So it's right above Maple, because Maple's right here. So, oh, here it is, Los Angeles, right there.
Yeah.
So that's Los Angeles. But we look, a lot of these are all around downtown, right? And so I just make that point because I wanted to, well, actually, let me point out a couple things. If you look up here, there's 451 South Main Street. That is actually where the Alexandria Hotel is, which used to be, well, and still kind of is, a single room occupancy hotel, where they have for low income folks to be able to have a space to live. And then here, down here on Maple and 7th in Skid Row, there's plans to build a high-rise hotel with like a couple affordable housing, you know, it's like a mixed income space. And then on Spring and, so I'm sorry, I mixed it up. Spring and 5th is where the Alexandria Hotel is, and 451 South Main Street is where the Roslyn Lofts are. So both of these have histories of being single room occupancies. So I was speaking about earlier how we also got predpol hotspots for Central Division. Now, when we look here, this is the area where these darker hotspots are, is Los Angeles. So all this area, or no, Los Angeles Street is right here, I apologize. Los Angeles Street is right here. And this blank space right here is actually Skid Row, which when I was speaking about, algorithms and predpol before, I said, it's still all very subjective because crime analysts, the algorithm is going to spit out tons of hotspots, but it's the crime analyst that decides what hotspots they want to send the officers to, right? And so what we see here is that actually Skid Row is being quarantined by predpol, because if folks are familiar with broken windows policing and the type of policing that happens in Skid Row, they actually have 50 extra officers just to patrol Skid Row. And under the program that's called the Safer Cities Initiative, which is now known as Reset. And so they have their own force, armed, military that patrols Skid Row. And then predpol is simultaneously being used to encircle Skid Row. Now, again, like I point out, this was Spring and Fifth where the Alexandria is. Now we see hotspots moving into these anchor points moving into Skid Row. When we look at them together now, this is downtown, and this is all the anchor points, right? And then this is how they encircle Skid Row. And so what's interesting about this map that stood out to me right away was that they didn't necessarily have the predpol hotspots in downtown, but they were definitely targeting locations in the new gentrified downtown. And what was very troubling was how predpol was being used to quarantine, right? So not only are they clearing people out of certain spaces, but they're quarantining Skid Row itself. So so it's really, it's a very kind of military-like tactic, and we're going to have this next conversation the next fourth Tuesday. We're going to bring in folks that are doing work around Palestinian liberation. They're called the Palestinian Youth Movement, and bringing in folks from AIM to talk about the different ways when we think about settler colonialism, when we think about removing people from land, what that looks like. So I'm going to move us into some other.
Jamie, can you hold that for a second? I got a question. Have we looked at the city's developments 2040 plan, particularly around Skid Row, and
so that was the work I was going to bring in right now.
Oh, gotcha.
Because that's the research that we're starting to do right now.
Okay, because it just sort of seems to overlap very cleverly as to what they had announced a few years ago.
Yeah, we were having this conversation in the last working group meeting about the 2040 plan, and so do you want to talk about it, Hamid? Can you point out what the development plan is? Because we haven't gotten that route. We actually just kind of put the link up for all of us to start going through it. But if you can share a little bit about it.
Yeah, these are all these plans that they come up with, but one of the primary focus is to expand and to, essentially it's going to end up gentrifying a whole lot of areas, further kind of restricting the Skid Row area. Skid Row, which used to be back from a hill in Pershing Square all the way to Alameda, is now moved east of Los Angeles and west of Alameda, because that's the artist district now. So these development plans are going to further then, under the guise of development, and create these public-private, low income, but really just much more bigger penthouse type gentrification as well. So in a sense, the one map that Jamie showed with circles was something that was, even when we first plotted those, we were kind of taken by a bit of a surprise, because there was not a whole lot of hotspots within Skid Row. But then, of course, there are these anchor points. So how it comes down to that, how location gets criminalized, how location, and they use this language of location-based policing, but it really, in essence, it's a proxy for racism. So so that's how I just wanted to kind of lift that thing as well.
I'm going to put that up here. I thought we had put that, but I'm going to write that here because I'm going to talk a little bit downtown so that we can look at that. So building off of what you're saying, Hamid, what the group has decided to do is those 4 locations I mentioned, we're now starting to do research. And so there's 2 points, 2 flows to this research that we're trying to do. One is we want to know what's going on in that space. And so Slauson and Crenshaw, where Marathon Clothing was at, we want to like what was the vibe, what was going on there, whose business was there, what were the businesses that were surrounding it, what was the real estate plans in that area. And I believe that Nipsey was actually also involved in opportunity zones. He was actually trying to take advantage of that program and file so that he could actually continue building in that community, in his community. So we want to kind of look at it from like a land development angle. And this is why we're starting to build with folks like from Anti-Eviction Mapping Project, Chinatown Community for Equitable Development, which Amy was the one who did all the maps that we just looked at, and Lauren from the coalition also did the maps. So we're building with folks who are kind of doing that work and are more familiar with that work, you know, at the same time educating ourselves. And then what the coalition's lane is, and what we're really trying to figure out, is how is that space being policed? So for example, with Nipsey Hussle, we knew he was an anchor point. They were using the anchor point system. We're trying to figure out if laser zones, if he was actually a laser zone, and then also trying to figure out because there's also maps, and I don't have these ones where it shows the laser zones and the anchor points of 77th Division. So we got to get that kind of all lined up together so we can also always be looking at those. But how was the area changing? Was there more surveillance equipment being put up? Were there big cars that were being used in that area? Like what was the surveillance technology that was being used? And this in order to, again, just like we're doing with the emails, is kind of like build that web of not only the inner multi-agency task force that are being used, but what other surveillance technology are they using as well. So we're doing that for that location, for 5th and Spring, for the Alexandria, for the Roslyn Lofts at 451 South Main Street, and then also for 7th and Maple, where they're trying to build those luxury apartments in downtown. So, or in Skid Row, I'm sorry. So that's some of the other work that the group is working on. So any kind of like feedback or questions, or maybe even websites or things that we should be looking at, because it's really truly a grassroots effort where some of us are a little more skilled in like understanding the real estate stuff and some of us are not, but we're just diving in.
So any thoughts, comments up until now? I think one of the guiding maybe piece could be that although the coalition has been deeply immersed in surveillance and looking at spying and infiltration, but really from there building it and doing a deep dive around these ideological issues around settler colonialism and white supremacy, and we talk about these things, but how are they being operationalized? How is just surveillance really the tip of the policing knife? So yeah.
Out. Sorry about that.
That's all right. Vida, do you have a question or a comment? I thought somebody did. Thoughts?
Yeah, any suggestions around around how we should be going about this, if it's important, what people think about this kind of work, like what we can end up doing with it. I think a lot of people are just very like, you know, there's so much talk about gentrification and redevelopment. I think the point for the coalition is to really map out what does that look like? What are the intricacies of it? You know, so that we can tell that story and know where we need to throw the wrench, right? To break it.
Go ahead, Andrew, if you want to unmute and make that comment. I think it's critical that everybody else can hear that too.
Sure, yeah. So I just found one of the LAPD documents on anchor points, and they have a whole paragraph explaining that, you know, in their own evaluation of anchor points, they found out that most of the locations were primarily commercial businesses. And they noted that they wanted to conduct operations cooperation with those business managers or owners of those places. So I think that, you know, a classic community organizing strategy would be to determine, you know, who are the people who are actually doing that? Are they on our side? Are they on the side of the police? And if, you know, pressure needs to be put on them, do they need to be picketed? Do they need to be home demos? Does there need to be, you know, popular education about who those people are, and sort of separating them from the community and making sure that they're known quantities in order to sort of reduce the impact and influence that they're making?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think the first step would be figuring out who these business are, right?
Right.
Mhm. And that's the hardest part in the emails, is that they're redacting a lot of the places they're targeting, at least not to build with, but to kick out.
One of the things maybe as, and of course, you know, just once this, I mean, it's weird because you start thinking about something and all of a sudden you realize COVID, hold on for a second, let's bring COVID into the equation. I was thinking about that it may not be a bad idea that maybe just going and mapping out in those locations, Jamie, as to who those businesses are
Yeah,
ourselves. And then kind of like then maybe just hitting them up, just reaching them out and see, like, you know, what they're kind of developing some sort of a very brief questionnaire kind of thing, or a survey, I don't know, like approaching it through that angle. But you know, trying to gather as much intel, because it's all about intel. It's like, you know, how do we gather that intel and how do we do that? So yeah.
Yeah, because it's like twofold what's going on, because the anchor points are not just spaces that, you know, they're building with, they're actually going after places as well. But I just started thinking, like with the Roslyn lofts, like Nipsey Hussle they were obviously not trying to build a relationship with him. They were
Right.
trying to get him the fuck out of the community. But like the Roslyn lofts, and when you look at the Alexandria, those have all become very highly gentrified spaces. When you think about 7th and Maple, where they're trying to build that new high rise, it'd be, you know, and I don't know if people are there, but it'd be interesting to talk. I don't think we'd be able to talk with the building developer, maybe someone could, but to find out like what kind of relationship those businesses have with law enforcement.
Yeah, we could
So I think
probably
that
also check with Steve.
that's
And
interesting.
yeah, Mike, do you you can unmute and make a comment?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. No, I was just wondering, with regard to the property that Nipsey Hussle owned, if I remember correctly, you know, he bought that from the previous owner. And I'm pretty sure I remember interviews with Nipsey where he was talking about how the previous owner was saying, hey, look, you know, the LAPD is, you know, just on our back about you. So I'm wondering, what about trying to get a hold of this previous owner? Maybe this owner has info about different government agencies that contacted him, were on his back, you know, blah, blah, blah. He, you know, he might have good info about, you know, that. I thought I had one. Oh, and also, I'll leave it at that. But yeah.
That's a good point.
Yeah, we're fortunate that we do have someone in the crew that we're keeping that in our back pocket right now.
Yeah.
There's going to be a possibility of that. So thank you for bringing that up. But I like that idea of actually getting on the ground and going and looking around to see how some of these anchor points are operating. Because, for example, Fifth or Cubano Corner in Skid Row, what ended up happening there is they put a new clinic there. A Weingard clinic is there. And so a year before the Weingard clinic opened, they deemed that space an anchor point, because those anchor points came in 2018. And then another, I think on the other side of that, where that anchor point is, it's also an SRO house as well. So it'd be interesting to just kind of go around to see that. So that is a good next step, just to kind of get out there and see what's going on. So any other thoughts that folks have? Any other way? And is it a good direction that we're going, kind of mapping out these agencies and taking a look at what these properties are doing? Do folks feel like it's going to serve a purpose for our housing folks and for our own understanding, to try to basically build cases around why this type of policing is harmful to our communities? Okay. Cool. So on that, I was just going to bring up one more point, and I wanted to share a little bit about, let's see, I'm going to go into what's been going on at the Police Commission. So let's see. Let's see, what did I do with that stuff?
You want me to pull up the agenda?
Yeah, can you pull up the agenda for me, Hamid? I don't know what I did with it.
Yeah, go ahead. If you want to take the screen off,
Okay.
I can pull it up.
Can you pull up the advisory commission and the agenda, so we can talk about those two things and talk about the action we had at the mayor's?
Sure.
And actually, if you could do me a big favor, because I need a bio break, can you start talking about the advisory commission for me?
I will go for the meeting agenda first, because I'm going to have to look for that one myself.
Okay, I'll be right back.
Okay, cool. So what Jamie was pointing to was this new sort of public participation rule that they have made. And this started on the 18th, on the previous commission meeting, that what used to be that they would have this whole agenda set up like this, and then you will be able to make a public comment, a 2-minute public comment, and on every item. And then you would just, like, whether it was, so if there are four items or 5 items, you can make a 2-minute public comment on each one of them, and on and on and on, and then even on the chief's report. But now what they have done is that they have now shut down, and number one, it's going from reverse, that they've made a total period for everybody who's in the meeting for a public comment of 45 minutes. So whether it's 100 people, or whether it's 2 people, or whether it's 200 people, if they want to make a comment, they're not going to allocate more than 45 minutes cumulatively. In that, they also have limited 1 minute per agenda item, up to 2 minutes total. So if you want to make a public comment on like 7 different items, well, you can't, but you'll have to do it in 2 minutes. And then lastly, if they want to do a general public comment, which is not related to an agenda, they'll add another minute and give you the 3 minutes. So, but that's the supposedly the public participation. When people talk about if we have civilian oversight, things will change. That's all BS, because that's the extent of your civilian participation. But on top of that, what they're also doing is that you have to make all of your public comment on top of the agenda. So it starts with a public comment. So now when these presentations are made, which used to be that if there were presentations from their staff or whoever, you would listen to the presentation, they would do their Q&A, and then the public would be able to make a comment. Now they have completely stopped that. You're just almost doing a speculation, and you're making a public comment on top of the agenda. So that's, and this is why, for us, historically speaking, we have vehemently rejected any form of ordinances or laws to pass where people talk about, like, let's have a civilian oversight, let's have surveillance oversight, because public needs to be particular. Well, if this is the extent of that shit, then this is what we are left with. So we then last week on the do you want to just pick it up from there, Jamie, and talk about the actions, and then we're not going to go into too many details, but what's to follow?
Yeah, well, I want to talk about the advisory committee too that's happening.
Well, I'm going to look for that. I don't know.
Oh, you are? Okay, perfect. So basically, last Tuesday was their first time coming back after they took 2 weeks off. Okay, great. Thanks, Victoria. So basically they took, all this unrest, all this rebellion is happening, and all these, kind of demands are coming from the community. And the commission has about 40 people that show up to the Zoom meeting, and we're all making our public comments. And then meeting ends. And then a day later, I believe that night, or Wednesday night or Thursday morning, they all of a sudden make an announcement about this groundbreaking reforms and having an advisory committee that's going to come and advise the commission, which is the advisors over the police. So the advisory committee is going to have an advisory committee that's going to come in and basically look at all these different components of policing, from like data, accountability, use of force. And they have this Pastor J. Edgar Boyd from the First AME Church, and everybody else is some type of academic or lawyer or, advisor to the presidency, all, focusing on policing and civil rights and, prosecutorial, or what do they call it? Prosecutorial justice, or, so we were like, oh, no, this is ridiculous. So then they took 2 weeks off, right? So we're coming and we're ready to like show up, the following 2 weeks, and we're mobilizing people to be there. And then all of a sudden, because the agendas come out the Friday before the Tuesday that they meet, we see this change on the agenda that they're reducing the totality of public comment to 45 minutes only, that you only get 1 minute per agenda item, and you only get a max of 3 minutes. And so that means if people were to speak to, 2 agenda items plus their public comment, and everyone did 3 minutes, that only 15 people could actually speak at the police commission. So we were like, oh, can't go for that. And we ended up showing up at the mayor's house Tuesday morning. Well, we had folks that were in the Zoom meeting. We were in front of the mayor's house, and we, just held space. We did like people power kind of comments, and we're chanting. We created art. He was definitely there because his security detail came out. And the police came and, those guys off, and we were able to hold space for like 2.5 hours. And it was a really powerful moment, I think. And I felt the power of the community, and nobody was off topic. Everybody could speak for however long they wanted to. And so, to say that, I think it's time for us to keep showing up. And it's time for us to kind of get the word out, seeing that this kind of violence is still happening. We see what's going on in Wisconsin right now. We see, these public lynching of our Black community, and happening and not ending. And, they tried to quell the protests. and put in a curfew immediately by 8 p.m. And so we see this definite effort to want to silence people, and it's time for us to kind of wake everybody up again and say, 20,000, 40,000 of us were in the streets. We can't, we can't not be in the streets still. And so, so I don't know if I should say any more, Hamid, or anything more that we should say, but I would say stay.
Well, I would just suggest that keep your ear to the ground, and maybe by this Saturday or Sunday morning, just keep an eye out for what may be moving early in the week and where. And so, just that's where, because I think it is something that if we're gonna have to, we have to take it to them. And how we take it to them, that's our call, and we do it in power, and we kind of just keep on building that thing. So yeah, there's a question from Ian as well, Jamie, that the properties that you were showing, were these connected to the business improvement districts?
Yes. hmm The ones in downtown definitely were. In fact, they called them the bid anchor points.
Well, thank you. Yeah, just in thinking of targets and everything like that, it's
Right.
because they obviously have a lot of, they rely on policing a lot.
I think the thing would be, Ian, that right now, as Jamie was saying, there's a lot of initial kind of deep dives that are going on, where it's for us to be more informed ourselves, identify locations, map out potential targets, and then timing wise, and that's what happened with our campaign, our fight against predictive policing. I mean, we really and kudos to Jamie's leadership, because Jamie led that campaign. I mean, although it was on our map, but we really started that deep dive starting January or February of 2016. And then by just April 2019, laser was dismantled, and by April of 2020, Pret Poll and even the chronic offender program was gone as well. So absolutely, I think it would be it finally comes back to being out on the street and organizing and building that power. Yeah, Jamie, I wanted to just also share the policing during the Uprisings, SIPRA as well, if whenever you can make time. Okay.
Yeah,
So,
definitely.
yeah.
So
Yeah,
so
go ahead.
I got Vivan and I got Brian, I got your emails, and so anybody else that wants to jump in, just drop it in the chat, and I'll just I'll reach out. And then for things that are happening on the ground, if you want to stay like connected, let me know too, and give me a signal number, and I can loop you in as well.
So real quickly, I also wanted to, so this is also, since this is a working meeting as well, we always invite people to join the fight and be a part of this building. So we basically, we filed this public records request on August 5th, just now this month. And this is on our policing tactics during the uprising. So now the back and forth has begun. So, we're asking basically for everything. And I know, Mike, you filed quite a few public records. So it'd be really nice to get your eye on this as well. And if you all are doing similarly something up in the Bay too. But this is in essence, just in their typical stalling tactic, they came back and they says, well, which email addresses are you looking for? Like, really? I mean, like, just, we don't know what different domain names that, a lot of these agencies use. But we want to get to everything that they have, they have communicated with, what sort of tactical operations have been involved, who has been in the mix. And here, of course, like, Ian, to your point, also asking them about business improvement districts, about their communication and collaboration during this, particularly around downtown Los Angeles, who they have been coordinating with around, because COVID has also been there as well. What was the process of transportation and release sites? And then, just who were the other units that were deployed as well. We also want to go back to the deployment of these local centers of data collection as well, any use of any photographs and video and audio material, in this one also. So yeah, I mean, aerial photography, because in a sense, of course, MC Catcher, Stingray, and Freedom on the Move, and Dirt Boxes, a lot of these things are in play as well. So this is where, and we are asking them up until the time of release. So it'll be interesting to see that, you know, that we haven't put a date on, like up until that point. We are saying it's on you. When you release them, we want everything, you know, up until that point of release. So even like last night, the LAPD was out in downtown Los Angeles and they were shooting rubber bullets. And so this is a very sort of a detailed, you know, just uh, public records request, as well as to just kind of, and these are some of our own comrades and homies that, you know, just we build with and we work with. So, you know, it'll be sort of like, you know, just kind of going after that and on and on and on. So the reason I wanted to just share was that this is very much in play. They have come back and, you know, just their initial response. So if you look at this site, this is, so we just responded to them today. So everything has to be done through a portal. So so they initially, they said that so this was their initial response. We reviewed your request for, please provide all email addresses. Like, fuck you, why the heck do we have to provide you any email addresses? You know, I mean, we don't know what kind of different shit they use. And then they came back and says, oh, okay, as a request for email, please let us know by the 26th. But then they come back and they says, okay, we need 14 more days, this, that, and the other. And then he says, okay, we need more time. So we even, just to check a box, we even sent a response about the email addresses, like, you know, that we don't believe that we are required to narrow our scope on any specific email addresses and all of that. So this is, again, you know, an ask for people to get involved, get engaged. I actually myself found going through public records to be very instructive. Because it really helps in kind of like unpacking a lot of shit. I mean, we've had several aha moments. It was through these public records that we had filed for drones about 6 years ago that we exposed ACLU's fuckery as well, where we found these emails between their head of policing and LAPD's counterterrorism, and sending a draft of a model ordinance, so that which was ordinance was oversight and transparency on surveillance, and they had sent that draft to LAPD's head of counterterrorism to ask for suggestions that what that model looked like. So a lot of times these things open up, and we are able to identify that, you know, who's where and what's really going on. The other piece also is, this is what we had filed back in September of 2015 on various items. So this is on the architecture of surveillance, basically, that we had filed. So this is something that we are still, this is a work in progress. They keep on going back and forth. We already have about several dozens and maybe a few hundred documents that we are putting together. But this is a very detailed piece that we are asking about, going down to the Ring and Nextdoor and various other things, like, you know, a whole lot of different things around both the deployment of technology, but also you know, just that what are the communications they're having, their internal memos, their internal communications. We've been able to get a whole lot of stuff out of there. For example, their Palantir training manual we've been able to get, which is huge. We've been able to get their invoices on Palantir, the data processing company, because and then along with this, we have also filed a public records, which we did in April, on LAPD's policing, you know, just program during COVID. So what is their policing during COVID as well? So, you know, how are they deploying all of that? Because we know that a lot of information that is being gathered now is this roadmap to recovery around contact tracing and everything. Palantir has the exclusive contract, and all of that information is going to Health and Human Services instead of CDC. And this program is called HHS Protect. So Palantir got like a $20 to $25 million contract. So we've been able to get through this also their contracts on Stingray, on digital receiver technology, although a lot of that stuff remains redacted as well. But yeah, so in a sense, you know, just and we are getting ready to file a. I think Jamie and Tiff are working on a detailed response to this thing. That what are the missing items, and we're going to hit them very soon. And the good news is that we just got a new domain where we are building a website which will be all about archiving. So everything that we are gathering, everything that we are getting is going to be there for public access. So whether it's like, you know, people who are doing research, people, so hopefully, fingers crossed, that should be up and running within the next 6 to 9 months, if not sooner. But hopefully, with a lot of this information, it'll be also be available for public as well to access. So any thoughts, any questions on this piece? And I'll pass it on to Jamie. A lot of work, a lot of you know, nerding out, but you know, it really, in a sense, when we say speaking truth to power, it's just bearing them, just absolutely bearing them, and they're just like, they want us to die. That's a look that they have, like, well, why don't you all go die, please, and don't do this shit. So yeah. Oh, actually, Ben is on the thing as well, who's helping build the website. So so then, thanks, Andrew. So I'm not sure how much time I can commit with school starting soon, but I know the history of policing of movement, especially in the last 20 years, quite well, and would be interesting in helping. Awesome, because it also helps, and I think the goal really is to then deploy them into organizing tools, develop zines, and develop various other things, and how do we rebuild this into popularizing this information as a way that it's coming directly from there. Cool. Jamie, right? If there's no other questions and comments, you're muted. Passing it back to you.
Cool. Well, that's all. So, and we're right on time. So if anybody has any announcements, and I got folks' numbers and emails, so I want to thank you so much. And I'll be reaching out in a way where, like I said, this working groups meet the first Monday and the second Monday. I'm sorry, first Monday and third Mondays of the month at 6 p.m. So I'll reach out to each of you individually, just find out what works best. If it's just I keep you in the loop, or if you're able to meet with the group, that's great. However it works, we're all volunteers, so you know everyone's schedule is different. But super happy, and I'm kind of glad it was a small group. It's always nice because you're able to build a little bit more and have more conversation, and it doesn't feel like prime time. Sometimes that's a lot to hold. But yeah,
I have
it.
a
So
quick announcement.
Yeah,
I have a quick announcement. So this is our surveillance 101 teach-in on Thursday. This is part 4. In this one, you know, initially we were doing some baseline stuff. Now we are looking at fusion centers and other things as well. So I know that Ian and Brian, if you all have any stuff to lift, you know, just from critical resistances work as well, you know, more than welcome to partner up in these discussions as well. So that is happening this coming. So every second and fourth Thursday is the surveillance 101s, and then our next Tuesday webinar, which will be webinar number 24, is going to be on gender and sexuality. We're happy to note that Mariela is back from you know, just spending some time with the newbie babies and all of that. And this month, our first Tuesday, gender and sexuality, we had a really powerful conversation with our folks and kin in Colombia, in Bogota, Colombia. These are trans sex workers who are organizing against police oppression and using street theater and street art to organize and to talk about it. So let's see what Chela and Mariela actually coordinate that Tuesday, what they have in store for us. So look out for that as well. Awesome. Okay. Well, I guess that's it. Thank you all very much. Thanks for hanging in there, and look forward to seeing everybody, here and on the street. And be well, and be healthy, and be safe. And thank you all very much. Have a good evening. Bye bye.
Bye now.
That's all.